Hello again, and welcome to this third in a series of three videos as part of the CWI and AIEB Continuous Professional Development Training on Climate Justice. And in this session, we'll be looking a little bit at community work, strategy, and action. And as I've said in previous videos, I really want to emphasize that as community workers, we bring an enormously important expertise to bear on the climate crisis in being able to support the voices and the perspectives of marginalized communities and groups to be heard and to influence climate policy. Incredibly important thing to be able to support the just transition away from fossil fuels in the face of the climate crisis. So in terms of strategy and action, then what we're really looking to do is to apply the principles of community work to this particular issue, to the climate crisis. And in the toolkit, you'll see a number of things. We have a mapping of the community work principles to climate justice and how they may relate to each other. So, for example, community work principle of participation, when applied to climate justice, might involve ensuring the rights of communities to meaningfully participate in climate policy making at all relevant levels, including the right to say no to polluting industries, such as mining. And you'll see these examples of the principles in action for each of the principles. You'll also see in the toolkit some examples of how we might work for climate justice at different levels, at the community level, at the organizational level, within our organizations, and at a policy level. So what I'd like to focus on in particular in this video is the strategy and the action piece. And we've often, I'm sure, heard the term think global and act local. And this is a really important adage to bear in mind. But I'd like to offer another perspective when it comes to the climate crisis, and that's the need to think strategically and act structurally. The crisis, as we've seen, is multifaceted, multi-leveled across all sectors of society and from the local to the global. So in order to scale up action and to achieve the change that we need at the pace that we need and with the justice that we want to see, we need to think about how we work both strategically, in partnership with others, and structurally to work in our communities, to respond to community needs and interests, but to address the change collectively, structurally at a societal level. So let's look a little bit at that. And as an example to consider, we're going to look at food and food justice, because access to good quality food will be a crucial ongoing concern in the face of the climate crisis, the changing seasons and weather patterns, disruptive weather events that will disrupt supply chains. But food is also, a crucial, concern and interest for all of us in our everyday. So food is a potential, along with energy and access to energy, is a potential issue to support and build collective action on a local level that has structural and strategic impact. So you'll see in the toolkit, when we look at strategic and structural action, it can be helpful to break it down into a number of different steps. And really what we're talking about here is applying community work strategy to an issue that is related to the climate crisis. So I think a lot of this will be hopefully familiar to you from your practice. And I hope it's helpful to break it down and make the connections to the climate crisis. But I'm sure I'm not going to be sharing anything that's particularly surprising or new for practitioners that are in the field. So the first step in terms of thinking structurally and strategically around climate, taking food as our example, is around creating space for local dialogue. So how are people experiencing the issue? How and what are the common concerns? So at this time, again, April 2023, we're experiencing a cost of living crisis. Food prices are rising. It's more and more difficult to access good quality organic food that's locally produced, good for the planet, good for your body, and good for your health. So this could be a stress and a burden on people, particularly as they're trying to manage budgets and make decisions around how to keep the lights on, how to feed the family, how to get to work. So this could be potentially some of the conversation that we might hear in a local community. And it can be helpful to create space to share that, to reflect on it together, to explore it and discuss it. And as I'm sure you'll know from your own work, creating these spaces for people to come together to reflect on something that feels like a very personal issue, and realize there's a commonality that other people are experiencing the same thing, can be a hugely empowering first step in bringing about change. So some examples of what we might do to create that space for dialogue around food and access to good quality food. A community food sharing event, a street feast or a potluck, coming together to share a meal. And I encourage you to check out Street Feast, the annual event that is organised by Neighbourhood Network, a great organisation that supports that, creating those sorts of convivial, neighbourly spaces in communities. Coffee mornings, and again, a space just to come together and have a chat, or something more active like a trip to a local community garden to listen to the gardeners and hear about the work that they do. And after that, then open up the space for conversation. So when we talk about conversations and dialogue in community development, Paulo Freire is never far from my mind at least, the great Brazilian theorist of dialogue as a critical and transformative practice in his many books, beginning with Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And for Freire, dialogue is a space for reflection that leads to action, and again, supports reflection. We're looking at this sort of cyclical process of people thinking critically, collectively, to develop action to shape their world. So I'm sorry for the amount of text here on the page, and I hope that the slides will be available separately so that you can take a look at this in your own time. But I just want to touch again on Freire's process as a refresher, and to consider what are the steps that we might take to undertake this sort of transformative dialogical process, according to Freire. Now, the first stage is listening as workers, beginning by listening to people informally, as we've said. What are their concerns? What's coming up for people again and again? What are we hearing about how the climate crisis or food insecurity affects people's lives? And what are the challenges, the injustices, the inequalities that we notice that are coming up again and again, the common themes, as well as the opportunities and the possibilities that we might see. And Freire called this stage doing a listening survey. So spending time, really listening to people and their concerns with an open heart, an open mind. And from that, we move on to stage 2, identifying the key issues. So what are the things that have come up again and again and again in the listening stage, in the listening survey? And Freire called these key themes generative themes because they have the potential to generate energy for action within a group. So again, taking our food issue as an example, maybe we hear that people are finding it very difficult to balance having access to food and paying their energy bills, or paying their rent. So we see that again and again, food might take the back seat. People opting for cheap but bad for their health and bad for their environment, fast food over, you know, going down to the local organic market and buying, you know, good quality fruit and veg and, you know, organic, good, good for the environment, washing up liquid and detergent and all the rest. So that could be a key theme that emerges. And very what we call that a generative theme, because it's something that's of concern to people. So it has the potential to generate energy action. The third stage then is to consider what prompts we might create to symbolize that generative theme. So are there images, poems, songs, music videos, stories, movie clips that capture the essence of that theme and reflect it back to people so that people can see, yes, this is the issue that I've been concerned with. And crucially, you know, they're doing that in a group process. And so that other people, they notice that other people might experience the same issue, and it generates the opportunity for a bit of dialogue. And Freire calls these prompts codes because they have encoded meaning in them. So you're taking that theme and finding a code or a prompt that will reflect back the issue to people in a real way. So codes. The fourth stage then is the dialogue itself, using the prompts to facilitate creative dialogue about the generative theme, focusing on posing questions and inviting reflections from diverse voices rather than we as community workers, you know, coming in and saying, well, we've noticed that people are having a problem with not having access to good quality food, and here's the action plan that we propose. Inviting people to reflect and develop action for themselves. And this is the final stage for Freire and key to the whole Freirean approach, supporting people to feel empowered, to act in the world, to name the issues for themselves, name how they want to address them, and feel like they can, feel like they have agency and autonomy and power collectively to begin to respond to the issue. Supported, of course, in that process by community workers. So moving then from the dialogue process, and again driven and supported by the needs and the interests of the community, and coming out of that process with people themselves. If we want to think structurally and strategically, it would be really helpful to map the policies, the actors, and the drivers and root causes of the issue. So if we want to have a collective structural strategic impact, who are we targeting our energy towards? What are the policies we're targeting our energy towards? What needs to change, and who has the power to change it? And through that, through that process of dialogue, that Freirean process of dialogue, we might use and explore some strategic planning tools to support the community to develop their analysis of the issues, of the root causes, and the possible responses. So we'll take a look in just a moment at some of those strategic planning tools, but examples in the food space of current policies and actors that we might be mapping out and making note of. So we've got at the moment set up under Joe O'Brien, under the Minister for Community Development, a food policy working group. And so this working group has been, at this point in time, has produced one important report, and their work is ongoing. So they're an important actor in this space to be aware of and to be across the work of. There's recent research on food poverty in Ireland, and that is linked in the toolkit. You'll find a link to the book by Drew, Uncovering Food Poverty in Ireland, A Hidden Deprivation from 2022. And another key policy framework which could be helpful in relation to food poverty is the Social Determinants of Health framework and the Healthy Ireland initiative of the HSE. So some examples of what we might find in our mapping process. But here we have some mapping tools. So this is the spectrum of allies. So say, for example, in the food space, we're looking to um, address food poverty and ensure good access to affordable, organic, good quality local food for all. So who are the people that we need to that are involved in that space? Who are our active allies? So say, for example, the food policy working group could be a potential active ally. Sorry, food poverty working group, a potential active ally. The minister may be a potential active ally in this example. Who are our passive allies? Who are the people that we could get on board with this, but maybe aren't necessarily thinking about the issue right now? Who's neutral? Who doesn't, who's important in the space, but isn't necessarily, doesn't have a view either way that we could potentially convince of our perspective. This could be other ministers in the government or other politicians or policymakers. And then who is in opposition? So, for example, the fast food industry, or particular lobby groups could be actively opposing our position. So mapping out the actors in this way can be really helpful in getting a strategic understanding of the field and the particular policy area, and then making it easier to understand where to put our energy. There's no point necessarily trying to shift those who are actively opposing us, but maybe those who are in passive opposition, we might be able to shift to neutral, and maybe those who are passive allies might be able to shift to active. So it helps us to map out and think about that field and where to put our energy. Another strategic mapping tool is the iceberg tool. And again, this can be really helpful in a number of ways. It's often used in the middle of a campaign to respond to an event, but we might also think about it as an issue. So what is happening? What is the nature of the issue at the moment? Well, people in our community don't have access to good quality food and are making trade-offs between energy and food and rent. So this is the current state of play. So what are the patterns and the trends behind that? What are the structures? What's influencing those patterns? What is the bigger picture of the cost of living crisis, of neoliberal economic structure on the issue, and what are the relationships between these? And then beyond that, what are the norms, the values, the cultural ideas, the policies that influence and cause this issue to come about? And beyond that, what are the mental modes? So what are the assumptions, the beliefs, the values that people hold that bring this about, keep it in place? So one example of this could be that we don't see food and access to food as a human right. We see food as a commodity to be traded and exploited for value. So the lack of treating food as a human right and the emphasis on seeing food in economic terms in the marketplace could be one of the key drivers and mental modes that are at play in causing food poverty and food insecurity in a community. An alternative to that is the concept of food sovereignty. So food sovereignty, well, we've got food security, which is about ensuring access to food and making sure that people aren't in food poverty. And then food sovereignty moves beyond just food security to ensuring the ongoing access to good quality food in a local environment or in a country. So this could be not just it's the difference between a handout. Food security could be a handout of grain or a handout of food from the food bank, meeting food security needs. Food sovereignty would be addressing the root causes of the problem and supporting long-term sustainable access to good quality food. and that will come about through the transformation of the agricultural system to ensure locally produced food is on offer locally, for example. So as I've mentioned, our policy and actors mapping might in the food space bring our attention to the work of the Food Policy Working Group and their report from July 2022, and also the Social Determinants of Health framework, which is a really helpful policy tool, which calls attention to not just the individual, psychophysical aspects of health, but the social context and the environmental context which support health. And this includes everything from gender equality, good governance, public participation, and local economies. So it can be very helpful in translating the the lived experience of poor quality food and lack of access to good quality food, and the impact that's having on people's health, with the collective concerns of a community, and support collectivization and collective action in the community development process. A third step then in thinking structurally and acting strategically for climate justice, and in this case food, is to identify local actions. So what can the community do locally to address the issue? Are there practical collective steps that can be taken to address food poverty? What can we learn from and share with other communities? So this could look like starting a community garden, and supporting people to understand how to grow some of their own fruit and veg on the balconies or in the back gardens. It could look like setting up a community supported agriculture project, which is a bit like a credit union and a farm brought together. So it's a membership based agricultural project where people pay membership that supports a couple of people to do some, to manage the farm, and then the produce gets shared back with all of the members. So community supported agriculture, these are programs that are growing in number across Ireland, and I encourage you to have a Google and see if there's one near you. And community cooking and food sharing events, another opportunity to come together around the table, share food, share recipe ideas, think about and to strategize and to have conversations as well. Really helpful in this is also to learn from other people who are doing really good work in other places. There's a lot of fantastic projects and interesting things happening around the country already. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. It's just about making those links and finding out what's happening in communities near you. So an example of practical local action from Galway, where I'm familiar with the community work projects there, is the Let's Get Galway Growing initiative, linking community gardens across Galway, from the local community centres to the local direct provision centres, family resource centres, homelessness shelters. So supporting local community groups to get out into the garden, grow produce, and linking it together through this network. So step 4 in our process of thinking structurally and acting strategically is to build alliances that work for there's a bit of a typo. They build alliances to work for structural change and action, is what I should say. So we're working in our communities. We support people to come together to analyze the issues and to take action to address things locally. What can we do now to scale that action up and to bring about structural change, policy change? So this might involve connecting with other communities, connecting with NGOs, campaigning, networking, building alliances, and developing identifying common ground for collective advocacy and action. And there are already a number of really um, uh, interesting groups, campaigns, organizations that are working in areas that we could connect with to address issues around food. So we have the Healthy Cities and Counties Network, which is supported by the HSE to support local community groups to implement the Healthy Ireland policy. And these could be key allies and key spaces to engage with around food. We have the National Social Inclusion Forum, a key space for the monitoring of national policy around social inclusion, and it could be an important space to bring issues of food poverty. We have a really interesting organization, Talamh Beo, which campaigns for a fair food system and for both the rights of farmers and the rights of consumers to have access to good quality food. So joining Talamh Beo would be a really helpful way to amplify our voices and to find allies and make common cause around the food issues we face in communities. The PPNs may be an important structure for raising issues and fighting for, say, access to community garden space with the local council. We also have local environmental networks, which are supported by the National Irish Environmental Network, a key space to engage with. And we might consider joining, if we're in County Cork, Cork City, or starting, if we're not, a local food policy council. And so food policy councils are a really interesting initiative. There are many of them in the US and in cities like Bristol and Edinburgh in the UK. And the aim of a food policy council is to bring together all of the different stakeholders in the food system, from farmers and consumers, communities, to restaurants and big actors, big purchasers like hospitals and universities, to join the dots for a sustainable and just, fair food system that nourishes the city's or the county's population, while also nourishing the local environment. So these are some of the examples that I've already touched on. Everything from the food policy councils to the PPNs. And so these 4 steps, from creating dialogue to mapping the actors and drivers, to identifying local actions and scaling up, provide a bit of a roadmap for how we might take a climate-based or climate-related issue in a local community and work with it to address the issue at a local level, address the needs and concerns of a community, while also contributing nationally and globally to the sorts of strategic and structural action that we need to see happening in order to address the climate crisis. So that brings us to the end of our 3 videos and the end of our whistle-stop tour through the Climate Justice Toolkit. I hope it's been helpful, and I invite you to get in touch with me if you would like to chat about any of this, or you have any questions or comments, and I'll share my contact details with AIED and Community Work Ireland to allow you to do that. And I wish you all the best in your own communities, making all this work, and I look forward to hearing how you do that.